I've delivered to over 400 addresses in Arizona. Desert subdivisions, new developments on the edge of nowhere, cul-de-sacs so quiet you could hear the heat pressing down on the asphalt. I've knocked on doors at 7 in the morning and doors at 6 in the evening. I have seen angry dogs, sleeping grandmothers, men who answered in nothing but a towel, kids who grabbed their packages before I could even set them down. 400 addresses. And in 3 years on the road, I never once thought too hard about what was on the other side of a door. You just knock. You wait. You move on. But there are 3 addresses I can't move on from. 3 stops on 3 different routes that I still think about when the house gets too quiet at night. 3 houses in Arizona where every door was answered, every package was accepted, every signature was collected, and every single one of those houses was empty. I know that doesn't make sense. I know how it sounds. But I need you to understand something before I go any further. I am not someone who believes in things he can't explain. I'm a practical man. I drove a route. I did my job. And what happened to me on those 3 stops does not fit inside anything I know how to explain. So I stopped trying to explain it. I just live with it now. The first story happened on Palo Verde Court. And I want to be honest with you, it started so slowly, so gently, that for the longest time I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that I just hadn't found yet. But the explanation never came. And the longer it didn't come, the worse it got. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to take just a moment and ask, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's get into it. Palo Verde Court was one of those neighborhoods that looked exactly the same no matter which direction you drove in. Every house the same tan stucco. Every yard the same decorative rock. Every driveway the same single car width, baking under the same white Arizona sky. It was the kind of place where you learned your landmarks fast or you spent 20 minutes circling, and I had learned mine. 3rd house past the fire hydrant. 2 garbage cans permanently at the curb. A ceramic roadrunner by the front door that somebody had painted with chipped blue paint. And a woman in the window. Her name, according to the delivery system, was Margaret Calloway. That's what the account said. I never confirmed it, never had a reason to. She was older, late 60s, maybe early 70s, and every single time I turned onto that street and pulled up to her house, she was standing at the front window. Not sitting. Standing. Always the same posture, both hands at her sides, slightly back from the glass, watching. The first time I saw her I gave a little wave out of instinct, the way you do when someone is clearly watching you approach. She waved back. Slow. Deliberate. Like she had been waiting for exactly that. I didn't think anything of it. Elderly woman, probably home all day, probably knew every delivery driver on the street by face at this point. I've had plenty of regulars like that. Sweet old men who'd come out in slippers just to say hello. Retired teachers who wanted to chat for 10 minutes about the weather. Margaret seemed like that kind of person. Friendly. Present. Reliable. Every time I came, she was there. Every time I waved, she waved back. It became part of the rhythm of that stop, pull up, wave, drop the package on the porch, move on. Simple. Comfortable. For about 3 weeks, that was all it was. Then one Tuesday morning, I had a package for Margaret that required a direct signature. Not unusual, sometimes it's medication, sometimes it's something expensive, sometimes the sender just requires it. I pulled up, waved at the window out of habit, walked up to the porch, and knocked. I could see her there in my peripheral vision as I approached. Standing at the window, same as always. So I wasn't worried. I knocked and waited. Nothing. I waited another 30 seconds and knocked again. Still nothing. I pressed the doorbell. I could hear it ring inside, a faint two-tone chime. Silence after it. I stepped back and looked at the window. She wasn't there anymore. The window was empty. I looked back at the door, waited another full minute, and then turned around to head back to my truck. As I reached the bottom of the porch steps, something made me look back over my shoulder. She was at the window again. Standing in the exact same position. Watching. I stood there for a second, feeling oddly unsettled in a way I couldn't justify. I walked back up to the door and knocked a third time. Harder. The kind of knock that says I know you're in there. Nothing. Not a sound. Not a footstep. I could feel the heat radiating off the door, and the silence coming back at me felt thick. Pressurized. Like the house itself was holding its breath. I left a notice slip, marked the delivery as undeliverable, and drove away. I checked my rearview mirror before I turned off the street. The woman at the window raised her hand. One slow wave. I came back the next morning with the package. Same thing. She was at the window when I arrived, same posture, same stillness. I knocked. No answer. Rang the bell. No answer. Waited. Went back to the truck. She was at the window, watching. I left another notice. That afternoon, while I was doing paperwork at the depot, I mentioned it offhand to my supervisor, told him I kept seeing someone at the window but nobody answered the door. He shrugged and said some people were just private. Didn't like dealing with drivers directly. Liked their packages left on the porch. I said this one needs a signature. He said keep trying. On the third attempt, something changed. I had started bringing my personal phone out of habit on that stop, not for any particular reason, just a low-level unease that I didn't want to examine too closely. As I turned on to Palo Verde Court, I held the phone up and took a photo through the windshield before I even got out of the truck. Just the house. The window. I wanted to see if she'd be there in a photograph the same way she was there in person. I took the photo, set the phone face down on the passenger seat, and walked up to knock. She was there in the window. I knocked. No answer. Rang the bell. No answer. I waited the full 2 minutes. Turned around. She was there, waving. I got back in the truck and picked up my phone. I opened the photo I'd just taken. The window in the photograph was empty. No one there. I had taken it while she was visibly standing there, and the photograph showed an empty window. I zoomed in. Blank glass. The reflection of the street. Nothing else. I put the truck in drive, pulled forward past her house, and then stopped again because I didn't know what to do. I just sat there for a moment with the engine running. And then I made myself think about it practically. Bad angle. Motion blur. Old woman, maybe she'd stepped back from the glass by the time the shutter caught. There was a reason. There was always a reason. But I sat in that truck longer than I should have. The engine was running and the air conditioning was on and I was looking at my phone and the photograph, and I kept zooming in and out on that window as though the resolution would change if I looked at it long enough. It didn't change. The window stayed empty. And what unsettled me most wasn't the absence of the woman in the photograph. It was the quality of the glass in the image. Clean, flat, reflective, the kind of window that hasn't been opened recently, that hasn't had a hand pressed against it from the inside. If someone had been standing at that window consistently, touching the glass, breathing against it, there would be marks. Fog. Smear. Some evidence of presence. There was nothing. The glass looked like it hadn't been touched from the inside since the house was last cleaned. Since before Margaret Calloway had been moved to her care facility. Since before anyone had been there at all. I tried, over the following days, to come up with a rational account of what I was experiencing. I am not, by nature, someone who gives up on rational explanations quickly. I drove that route for 3 years and I had seen strange things before. The man who answered the door in full costume makeup every single day and never once referenced it, the house where every window was covered with aluminum foil on the inside, the property on the outskirts of Gilbert that had 12 numbered mailboxes on a post at the end of the driveway but no visible house behind it. Strange things happen in ordinary places. People are strange. I had learned to accept that and move on. But the photograph was different. The photograph was physical evidence that what I was seeing was not consistent with what was actually there. And a photograph does not lie the way a tired mind lies. A photograph just captures what the light shows. What the light showed was an empty window. But I knocked on that neighbor's door on my way back through the street. An older man named Dennis, who had been on that court for 11 years. I asked him, casually as I could manage, about Margaret at the house with the ceramic roadrunner. I said I'd been trying to deliver something to her and couldn't seem to catch her at the door. Dennis looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, nobody's lived in that house for over a year. The owner, a woman named Margaret, had been moved to a memory care facility out of state. The house was sitting vacant. He said the property management company was supposed to be watching it but he hadn't seen anyone over there in months. And then, and this is the part that made the air go out of me, he leaned against his doorframe and said, "It's funny though. Because I keep seeing someone at that window too." I didn't go back to that address for almost 2 weeks. I traded the stop with a colleague named Ryan, told him I had a scheduling conflict. He took it without question. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I didn't tell anyone. On the 14th day, the package came back to me. Ryan had requested a route swap, and Margaret's address was back on my manifest. Another certified delivery. Signature required. I sat in the depot parking lot for an extra 10 minutes before I could make myself start the truck. I pulled onto Palo Verde Court and she was there. Of course she was there. Standing at the window. Hands at her sides. That same patient, watching stillness that I now recognized as something other than friendly. I walked up to the door. I knocked. I rang the bell. I waited. And this time I made a decision, I was going to stand there. I was not leaving without an answer of some kind. I stood on that porch in 106-degree heat for 3 solid minutes. I counted. I watched the second hand on my watch. 3 minutes, not moving, not speaking, just waiting. The house was completely silent. Not the silence of a house where people are ignoring you. The silence of a house where nothing lives. After 3 minutes I looked down at my electronic signature pad. Something was wrong. The signature field, which should have been blank, waiting for input, already had a signature in it. I hadn't pressed anything. Nobody had come to the door. The pad had been in my hand the entire time, and nobody had touched it but me. I checked the timestamp on the entry. It read 11:47 and 12 seconds. I looked at my watch. The current time was 11:47 and 59 seconds. The signature had been recorded 47 seconds before I had even knocked. I looked at the signature itself. My hands started doing something they have never done before or since, they just began to shake. Not from fear, or at least that's what I told myself. Just shock. Just the involuntary physical response to something that does not fit. Because the signature on that pad was in my handwriting. Not close to my handwriting. Not similar. My handwriting. The specific way I curve the letters, the way I press too hard on certain strokes, the little half loop I make at the end. Mine. On a pad I had been holding in my own hands the entire time. I put the package down on the porch. I walked back to the truck at a pace I would describe as controlled. I drove to the end of the street. I pulled over and sat there for a long time. I filed the delivery as complete because the system already showed it was complete. I requested a permanent route reassignment the following Monday and got it approved without issue. The new driver on that route was a young guy named Marcus. He lasted about 2 weeks before he asked to swap again. He never said why. I never asked. I think I already knew. I still wonder about Margaret Calloway. About the woman in the memory care facility somewhere out of state, whether she knows something is standing at her window. Whether it's waiting for her to come back. Whether it's been there a long time, longer than she lived in that house. And I wonder sometimes whether it was watching me, or whether it was trying to become me. Because the handwriting wasn't just mine. It was mine on a bad day. Mine the way I write when I'm tired or scared. Like it had been practicing. Like it had been watching for long enough to learn. There's a particular kind of neighborhood that only exists in Arizona, out past where the older city ends and the desert begins again. Brand new developments carved straight out of the scrubland, streets that don't appear on older maps yet, houses that still smell like paint and dry concrete, mailboxes that gleam because nobody's touched them. These neighborhoods always feel slightly unreal, like a stage set assembled overnight. Everything is the same color. Everything is the same height. The palm trees are still in their planting tubes. The grass, if there is grass, is the kind that comes on a roll. It all looks like it's waiting for something. Like the set isn't quite ready for the performance to begin. The development I'm talking about was about 12 miles east of Chandler, out past the last traffic light on a road that had no name on my GPS for the first 6 months I drove it. I'll call it Mesa Ridge, which is close enough to the actual name. I got assigned to cover it mid-season, taking over from another driver who had left the company. Nobody explained why he left. That happened sometimes. It was a transient job. People moved on. Most of the houses on Mesa Ridge were in various stages of being occupied. Some had cars in the driveways and bicycles on the lawns and all the normal signs of family life beginning. Some were clearly still vacant, windows bare, no personal objects on the porches, that blank, slightly hollow look that newly built empty houses have, like they haven't decided who they are yet. A delivery driver learns to read these signs fast. You get a feel for whether a house is lived in before you even reach the door. The temperature of the porch, the presence of small things left outside, the particular quality of the silence from the other side. You develop an intuition. One house on Mesa Ridge, about 3/4 of the way down the main street, violated every part of that intuition in every direction simultaneously. It was number 87. A corner lot, slightly larger than the others. No car in the driveway, ever. No visible personal objects. Windows bare. And yet packages came to it almost every single day. Sometimes twice a day. From the first week I covered that route, number 87 was getting deliveries constantly, Amazon, Wayfair, Crate and Barrel, Williams-Sonoma, a children's furniture company, 2 separate pet supply retailers. The kind of shopping you do when you're setting up a new home. Furnishing rooms. Stocking a kitchen. Making a place habitable. I assumed it was an investor, or a family buying everything ahead of their move-in date. That's not uncommon. People order online, everything piles up on the porch, then they move in and unpack all at once. I left packages at the door, same as always. No issues, no signature required. For the first 3 weeks, everything was routine. Then the certified envelope came. It was a Tuesday morning, around 10 o'clock. I was already sweating through my shirt, the kind of heat that makes the air above the asphalt shimmer and warp. I walked up to 87 with the envelope and knocked. And from inside the house, from right behind the door, close enough that it startled me backward, a dog started barking. Loud, urgent, frantic. Not a small dog. Something deep-chested and serious, the kind of bark that means I am here and I am large and I know you are there. I stepped back. Right. So someone was home. I knocked again and called out that I had a certified delivery, that I just needed a signature and I'd be on my way. The barking stopped. Not gradually, the way a dog settles when its owner shushes it. Abruptly. Mid-bark, like a recording being cut off. The silence that followed was so complete and so sudden that it was louder than the barking had been. I stood very still. I waited. From the other side of the door, nothing. No footsteps. No voice. No sound of a dog settling, no claws on the floor, no breath, no whimper. Just complete, pressurized silence. I raised my hand to knock again, and the door swung open. Not all the way. Maybe 40 degrees, maybe halfway. Just, open. Moving inward on its own without any hand on it, without any visible mechanism, just the door swinging slowly open the way doors do when the latch hasn't caught and a draft is pulling it. Except there was no draft. The air in Arizona in August does not draft. I stood there looking at the open door and the darkness beyond it. The house had no lights on. The curtains were drawn. From where I stood I could see a hallway, a pale stretch of new tile floor, the edge of what looked like a cardboard box. And nothing else. No person. No dog. Nothing. I looked down at my signature pad. It already had a signature on it. Same as I would later experience on Palo Verde court, but this was the first time I'd seen it, the first time I understood that something on my routes was capable of doing this. The delivery was already logged as received. I stood there holding a certified envelope for a house with no visible occupant, a door that had opened on its own, and a pad that had been signed without a hand. I set the envelope just inside the threshold, on the tile, not crossing into the house myself. The door swung closed behind it. Slowly. With a quiet, deliberate click of the latch. I told myself there was a smart home system. I told myself the owner had a security camera, had seen me approaching, had triggered the door remotely and accepted the delivery through an app. It was a reasonable explanation. It was a new development. New builds had all kinds of technology built in. I told myself this very firmly for about 4 days, until the next delivery to number 87, when it happened again, except this time, instead of a dog, I heard children. 2 of them, maybe, young, laughing at something, the way kids laugh when they've seen something funny on a screen, that sudden bright burst of delight. Then silence. The same abrupt silence. The door opened. The pad was pre-signed. I left the package. The next time, a television, volume low, some kind of talk show. Then silence. Door. Package. The time after that, a single phone ringing from somewhere deep in the house, ringing once, and stopping. By this point I had started keeping a personal log on my phone. The dates, the sounds, the contents of the packages. I kept the contents because I was trying to understand what was being assembled inside that house. And what was being assembled was a life. A complete, fully furnished American domestic life. The Wayfair orders had been a sectional sofa, then a dining table, then a bed frame. The children's furniture company had sent a bunk bed, then a dresser. The pet supplies, 2 large bags of dry food, a dog bed, a set of ceramic bowls. There was even a welcome mat at some point. I had to step over it to leave a package, and I noticed it said Home Sweet Home in a cheerful font. I had not put it there. It had not been there the day before. About 3 weeks into this I noticed something on the porch that stopped me completely. One small shoe. A child's sneaker, maybe a size 3 or 4. Canvas, white, with Velcro straps. There was dried mud on the bottom of it. Red-brown desert mud, the particular color of the soil out past the development. I stood looking at it for a long time. A single shoe. Not a pair. One. The kind of thing that ends up separated from its mate in a rush, in a car, in a chaotic morning. The kind of thing that means a child passed through here. I did not touch it. I left the package and walked back to my truck quickly, not looking at the window. That evening I did something I shouldn't have. I looked up the property address in a public records database I'd found before for unrelated reasons. Just the county assessor records, owner name, purchase date, assessed value. Number 87, Mesa Ridge. The records came back immediately. They listed the property as vacant. Current owner, none of record. No sale logged. No transfer of title. According to the county of Maricopa, that house did not have an owner. It had been built and never officially sold. I tried to bring this up at work without explaining my actual concern. I said something vague about number 87 getting an unusual volume of deliveries for an unoccupied address and whether that should be flagged. My supervisor asked if the packages were being accepted. I said yes. He said then there was nothing to flag. I dropped it. I couldn't explain to him what I actually needed to say, which was, there's something in that house that is building a life from the inside out, and I don't know what it is, and I don't think I should keep delivering to it. What I kept coming back to, in the nights between deliveries, was the accumulation of it. Not any single event, not the dog, not the door, not even my name spoken from somewhere in the dark of that hallway. It was the accumulation. The careful, patient, systematic accumulation of everything a family needs. Whoever or whatever was inside number 87 had not ordered randomly. It had ordered in sequence. Foundation items first, large furniture, mattresses, the structural pieces of a domestic life. Then the layering items, kitchenware, linens, decorative objects. Then, last, the personal items, the children's things, the pet supplies, the welcome mat. It had built the interior of a home the way a person builds a home, in the order you do it when you've thought it through. And that intentionality, that evidence of sequential planning, frightened me more than any of the sounds or the signatures or the doors that opened on their own. Because randomness can be explained. Pattern cannot. Pattern means something is thinking. The last delivery I made to number 87 was on a Friday afternoon in late September. It was a large box, awkward dimensions, heavy, the kind you have to carry with both arms and can barely see over. I walked up the path, stepped over the Home Sweet Home mat, and saw that the door was already open. Not ajar. Open. Fully open, the way you'd leave it if you were carrying furniture in and needed clearance. I stood at the threshold. The box was too heavy to hold while I waited, so I set it just inside, on the tile, the same way I'd left that first envelope weeks ago. As I straightened up and stepped back from the doorway, I heard something from deep in the house. Far back, in what would have been the kitchen or maybe a hallway beyond it. My name. Just my name. Spoken quietly, at a normal conversational volume, the way you'd say someone's name to get their attention across a room. Not a shout. Not a whisper. Calm. Flat. My name. Once. I took 2 steps backward off the porch. The door closed. I want to be very careful about how I describe what I felt in that moment because I don't want to be dramatic about it. It wasn't panic. It was something colder and more fundamental than panic. It was the particular sensation of understanding that something knows more about you than it should, and that you are standing directly in front of it, and that it has just made that knowledge visible. My name is not on my truck. It is not on my uniform. The account at number 87 was listed to no person of record. I had never spoken at that address, never introduced myself, never left any documentation with my name on it. And yet from deep in that lightless house, in the flat, patient tone of something that had been practicing, something had said my name. My full name. Not a nickname. My name the way it appears on official documents. I drove straight back to the depot and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could go inside. I filed a note in the system about an unsafe delivery situation at that address and requested it be reassigned. A colleague named Brandon covered it the following week. He texted me after his first run and said the place gave him the creeps. He said he'd heard breathing from the other side of the door before he could even knock, steady, unhurried breathing, like someone standing very close to the inside of the door and waiting. He covered it one more time and then asked off the route. I don't blame him. The strangest part of this story, the part one keep coming back to, the part one cannot fold into any explanation that holds, is what I saw about 2 months after I stopped covering Mesa Ridge. I drove past the development on a day off, on my way somewhere else, and I looked down the street toward number 87 out of habit. There was a minivan in the driveway. There were kids playing in the front yard. A woman was bringing bags in from the car. A perfectly ordinary Saturday afternoon scene. A family had moved in. I slowed down to look. The kids were running in the yard, and as I passed, one of them stopped running and stood still, looking at the street. Looking at me. She was wearing one shoe. Just one. The other foot was bare. And she didn't wave. She just watched me drive by with the same flat, patient stillness I had seen so many times in that window on Palo Verde court. I did not stop. I drove the rest of the way to where I was going, and I didn't talk about it, and I try not to think about whether that was a real family or whether something had finished furnishing the house and had simply become what it needed to be. I try not to think about what happened to that shoe. I especially try not to think about the fact that whatever is in that house already knew my name. And that it said it only once. As if it was confirming something. As if it was checking something off a list. I want to be straightforward with you about something before I tell you this third story. The reason I tell you the first 2 is because they are the context for the third one. Without the first 2, the third story sounds like something a person invents, the kind of story that gets told at a campfire and believed in the dark and dismissed in the morning light. But I have spent a great deal of time with this, alone, in the quiet of my own apartment, trying to find the place where the logic breaks down. And I can't find it. The logic doesn't break down. The facts line up too cleanly. And what they line up into is something that still, on certain nights, makes me unwilling to close my bedroom door all the way. I quit my delivery job 4 months after the first story began. The third story is why I quit. Not because it was the most frightening, though it was. Because it was the only one that did not stay at the address. The first story stayed on Palo Verde Court. The second story stayed at number 87, Mesa Ridge. The third story came home with me. And once something like this knows where you sleep, the job suddenly seems much less important. The address was out past the eastern edge of my extended route, along a gravel road that connected to the main highway about 3 miles out of the last-named subdivision. It had been added to my route mid-season, quietly, without explanation, just appeared in the system one Monday morning with a standing order flag, meaning deliveries were expected on a regular basis. The listing gave a full street address, but if you tried to find that address on a map, it rendered as a point in the middle of undeveloped desert land. The satellite image showed a structure, a house, low and old-looking, surrounded by scrubland in distance. No other structures within sight. The nearest neighbor, based on my driving time, was about 4 miles back toward town. The first 3 deliveries were unremarkable in that particular exhausted way that very remote addresses have: long drive, no one home, packages left at the door per standing instructions, no signature required. The house was a single-story structure, older than anything else I delivered to on that route, built in a style that belonged to a different era of Arizona than the beige stucco developments I usually covered. Brick, I think, with a covered porch and 2 narrow windows at the front. The paint was the color of old bone. There was no car, no outdoor furniture, no indication of a person living there, but the porch was swept clean and there were no leaves or dust accumulating around the doorstep, the way it does around abandoned structures in the desert. Something was maintaining it. Someone or something was keeping the porch clean. On the 4th delivery, the package required a certified signature. Return receipt required. That meant I needed a hand on the pad and a face at the door. I drove the 3 miles of gravel road, pulled up in front of the old brick house, walked up the porch steps, and knocked. I listened. For about 15 seconds, nothing. And then from deep inside the house, I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly. More like weight shifting. Something large, moving slowly, dragging, and I want to be careful with that word because drag implies something that cannot lift itself properly, and that is precisely how it sounded. Not someone walking with something heavy. Something moving with effort, pulling itself across a floor. The sound stopped. The silence that followed had a specific quality that I have difficulty describing accurately. It was not the silence of an empty house. It was the silence of a house that is very carefully not making noise. There is a difference and I had begun to learn it, by that point in my time on those routes. One is absence. The other is suppression. I stood on the porch, holding the certified envelope and the return receipt pad, and I felt the second kind of silence pushing back at me through the door like pressure. Like something pressing its weight against the other side without touching it. The door opened. Not all the way. 8 inches. Maybe 9. Just enough for an arm to extend through. And an arm did extend through. A hand reached out for the envelope. I want to describe this hand accurately because I have spent a long time trying to talk myself out of what I saw, and I cannot do it. The skin was too dry. That's the closest I can get. Not elderly dry, not the cracked skin of someone who works outdoors, but dry beyond what skin does. The knuckles were very large, very pronounced. The hand was pale in a way that had nothing to do with sun avoidance, pale the way things are pale when the thing that makes them colorful is no longer present. The hand took the envelope cleanly, quickly, with a practiced efficiency that contradicted every other thing about it. And then it extended back out through the 8-inch gap, holding the return receipt pad. I took the pad back. It was already signed. I told myself, I made myself tell myself, that the hand belonged to an elderly person, possibly ill, possibly disabled, who lived alone and was doing their best to manage interactions with the outside world with minimal exposure. This is a real thing that real people do. I had delivered to people with conditions that affected their appearance before. I had never made a person feel less than welcome to receive their mail. I drove away and I did not let myself turn around. I focused on the road. 3 miles of gravel, then the highway, then the familiar grid of streets that made sense. I focused on that. But the deliveries kept coming to that address. And every time, the same ritual, I knocked, I heard the slow dragging movement inside, a silence that pressed, the door opening to its exact 8-inch gap, the hand coming through. Always the same hand. Always the pre-signed receipt, extended back through the gap before I could even locate a pen. I started trying to photograph the door, the porch, the moment the hand appeared. Every photograph I took at that address came out corrupted. Not blurry, not overexposed, corrupted. Black frames with white digital noise, like the file itself had been damaged in the camera. I tried 2 different phones and a backup camera I borrowed from a colleague. Same result. Nothing photographed correctly at that address. The images were always wrong. I began losing sleep in a way that I had not experienced since I was a child, not lying awake with thoughts, but a deeper disturbance, the kind that comes from a place below thought. I started dreaming about the door. Always the same image, the old brick porch, the 8 inches of darkness, and the hand coming through. In the dream I always reached for the hand instead of the envelope, and the dream always ended before I could tell whether I was trying to help it or whether it was trying to pull me through. Then the package arrived on my doorstep. I was leaving for work on a Thursday morning, stepped out of my apartment in the Ahwatukee neighborhood of Phoenix, and there it was. Sitting on the mat in front of my door, on the 2nd floor of a locked-access building, in a neighborhood that had nothing to do with my delivery route. A padded envelope, addressed to me. My full name. My apartment address. The return address was a P.O. box in a town I didn't recognize, and when I looked it up that evening, the P.O. box number didn't correspond to any active postal address in any town in Arizona. The return address did not exist. But the package had been delivered. It was there. I had touched it. I opened it at my kitchen table. Inside were the return receipt slips from every certified delivery I had made to that remote address. All of them. Folded once, neatly, in chronological order. My copy of each receipt, which I was supposed to drop in the outgoing mail slot at the depot after each run, those copies were accounted for, they were in the system. But these were different. These were the customer copies. The copies that stayed with the recipient. They should have been inside that brick house, in the hands of whatever lived there. Instead they were in a padded envelope on my apartment doorstep. I sat with them spread out on my kitchen table for a long time. My home address was not in any record connected to my employment. I had not given it to the company. I used a P.O. box for HR paperwork, a habit I'd had for years. Nobody on my routes had any way to know where I lived. And whatever was at the end of that gravel road had my return receipts, knew my name, knew my address, and had found a way to close the loop. It had given back what I had given it. Or it was showing me that it could. I didn't sleep well that night. I sat up late with every light in the apartment on, which is not something I had done since I was 9 years old. I finally fell asleep on the couch around 2 in the morning with the television on. By 3 I was awake again. My bedroom door was open. 8 inches. Exactly. I always sleep with my bedroom door closed. It was closed when I fell asleep on the couch. It had been closed when I checked the apartment before sitting down. But at 3 in the morning, the bedroom door was standing open by exactly 8 inches. The same gap. The same darkness beyond it. I sat up on the couch and I looked at that door for what felt like a very long time. The apartment was still. The television was on mute, I'd hit the button in my half-sleep. In the silence, I stared at the 8-inch gap in the darkness inside my own bedroom, and I waited. For 40 seconds, nothing happened. I counted. I could not have told you why I counted, except that counting gave me something to do with my brain other than the alternative. 38 seconds. 39. 40. And then, 3 knocks. From the other side of the bedroom door. Patient, measured, deliberate. A clear pause between each one. The rhythm of a delivery driver at a residential door. My rhythm. The exact cadence I used on every door on every route, the particular 2-1 pattern I had developed over 3 years, knock knock pause knock, that my colleagues had teased me about as being too formal. 3 knocks, in my pattern, from the other side of the door to my own bedroom. I turned on the lamp beside the couch. I stood up. I walked to the bedroom door, reached out, and pushed it open all the way. The bedroom was empty. The window was closed and locked, the closet door was open the way I always leave it, nothing was out of place. The room was empty and ordinary and lit by the lamplight spilling in from behind me. I stood in the doorway and breathed for a minute. And then I looked down. On the floor, at the base of the door, there was a single return receipt slip. Face down on the carpet. I reached down and picked it up. The front was blank, no address filled in, no sender, no recipient line completed. The back was not blank. On the back, in my own handwriting, was my signature. And beneath it, a delivery timestamp. 3:12 a.m. The current time on my phone when I looked, 3:12 a.m. I quit my job the following Monday. I gave 1 week's notice, completed it without returning to that route, and requested all remote desert addresses be removed from any route I was given for the remaining days. I moved apartments 2 months later. I moved to a different part of the city, to a building with a doorman, to a unit on the 6th floor. I did not explain to the building manager why I specifically asked about the lock on the interior stairwell door. I just asked. About 3 weeks before I moved, I drove past the gravel road. Not down it, I didn't turn onto it. I just slowed down on the highway and looked out the window, from a safe distance, toward where the old brick house would have been. I was far enough away that I could only see the general shape of the landscape, the scrubland, the flat blue of the sky. But there was a vehicle at the end of the gravel road, parked in front of the structure. A delivery truck. Same model as mine. Same faded white color. Same dent on the rear right bumper that I'd gotten in a parking lot and reported to my supervisor and been told would be repaired on the next maintenance cycle. Same dent. Same truck. Parked at a house where no one lived, on a road that didn't officially exist, receiving a delivery that nobody ordered. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know what signed my name. I don't know what stood on the other side of my bedroom door and knocked in my pattern. But I know this, it learned from watching me. It studied the way I knocked and it practiced until it could do it the same way. It studied my signature until it could reproduce it. It learned my name and my address and the way I drive and the truck I drove in. It learned me, piece by piece, the way you learn something you intend to become. And somewhere out there, on a route like mine, on a long gravel road in the Arizona desert, there is a door standing open exactly 8 inches, and something is waiting behind it. Something that has gotten very good at appearing to be something it isn't. Something that knows how to sign its own name now. And I am not entirely certain, on the quiet nights, in the new apartment with the locked stairwell door, I am not entirely certain that it isn't still practicing. If these stories kept you up tonight, you already know what to do. Drop a sign in the comments if you believe me. Tell me which story got to you the most. And if you're watching from somewhere quiet, somewhere dark, somewhere with doors that don't quite close all the way, make sure you subscribe. There are more routes I haven't talked about yet. And some of them are worse than this.